Operation Stoneage. Operation Stoneage, or Operation Stoneage, 1620 November 1942, was an Allied convoy operation to the Mediterranean island of Malta in the Second World War. To disguise the destination of the ships, some took on their cargo at Port Sudan in the Red Sea. The four ships of Convoy MW-13 sailed from Alexandria on 16 November, escorted by cruisers, destroyers, and round-the-clock air cover from captured airfields in Egypt and Cyrenaica, eastern Libya. A complementary convoy from Gibraltar was cancelled when the British and Allied First Army landed in Morocco and Algeria in Operation Torch 8-16 November and made less progress along the Algerian coast than expected. MW-13 sailed about 40 nmi 46 mi, 74 km from the African coast as far west as Benghazi, then turned north for Malta. The Axis retreat along the Libyan coast was monitored by the Bletchley Park code breakers of the German Enigma coding machine, which revealed the inability of Panzerarmee Afrika to counter-attack the Allies. At dusk on 18 November, an attack by Axis torpedo bombers hit the 6-inch 6 and 150 mm cruiser HMS Arethusa forward of the bridge and killed 156 members of the crew. Arethusa made a slow voyage back to Alexandria, being towed backwards at first and then continuing backwards on one engine. MW-13 arrived at Malta at 1:30 a.m. on 20 November, breaking the Axis siege of Malta 11 June 1940 20 November 1942. Background: Battle of the Mediterranean. Malta. In October, the submarines Parthian and Clyde from Gibraltar and Rockwell, in two trips from Beirut, in the eastern Mediterranean, carried aircraft fuel, food, oils, and torpedoes to Malta. Operation Train delivered 27 Supermarine Spitfire fighters to Malta 28-30 October. From 1 to 3 November, Parthian and Clyde delivered more stores and two attempts were made to get unescorted ships to Malta by ruse. Empire Patrol departed Alexandria on 1 November, around noon on 2 November, when sailing alone, a Dornier Do-217 bomber. Operation Crupper began when two ships in civilian guise sailed from Britain, with convoy KMS-1 to Gibraltar, then detached for Malta in the hope that the Vichy French authorities would be incapable of preventing their passage. The ships were fired on by coastal artillery at Cap Bon and boarded. Both captains tried to bluff their way through, but the ships were interned at Bizerta. After the ruse failed, the fast Abdeel-class minelayer HMS Manxman sailed from Alexandria on 10 November and arrived 2 days later with powdered milk, cereals and meat, leaving for Gibraltar the same day, to collect mines and lay them off Cape Bon. HMS Welshman left from a convoy bringing supplies to North Africa for Operation Torch and arrived at Malta on 18 November. Prelude. Allied Air Forces. A combined Navy and RAF operations room was set up at the HQ of 201 Naval Cooperation Group. AHQ Egypt and the Desert Air Force DAF were to contribute single-engined fighters to a north-south line 40 nmi 46 mi, 74 km west of Benghazi, where they would hand over to aircraft from Malta. US B-24 heavy bombers were also ready at Gambut in support. At Malta, the RAF maintained a composite photographic, reconnaissance and air-to-surface vessel ASV reconnaissance squadron, just under 2 squadrons of torpedo bombers, 3 long-range twin-engined and 5 single-engined fighter squadrons for convoy protection, and a night bomber squadron, which was due to raid Axis airfields on Sicily during the night. Air defense of the convoy had to contend with threats from Crete and then Sicily, but the threat of attack from Cyrenaica was much reduced after the Second Battle of El Alamein. As Panzerarmee Afrika withdrew westward, the DAF was to take over the Axis air bases from which the Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica had attacked Malta convoys. Before sunrise on the third day of the voyage, the convoy was expected to be in range of Malta-based fighters. Axis Command. The Axis command structure in the Mediterranean was centralized at the top and fragmented at the lower levels. Benito Mussolini had monopolized authority over the Italian armed forces since 1933 by taking the offices of Minister of War, Minister of the Navy, and Minister of the Air Force. Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring of the Luftwaffe commanded German ground forces in the theater as Commander-in-Chief South Oberbefehlshaber Sud, OB Sud, but had no authority over Axis operations in North Africa or the organization of convoys to Libya. Fliegerkorps Roman II and Fliegerkorps X were subordinate to the usual Luftwaffe chain of command. Since November 1941, Kesselring had exercised some influence over the conduct of the German naval operations in the Mediterranean as the nominal head of Naval Command Italy Marinekommando Italien, but this was subordinate to the Kriegsmarine Che. German service rivalries obstructed cooperation, and there was little unity of effort between German and the Italian forces in the Mediterranean. Kesselring had the authority only to coordinate plans for combined operations by German and Italian forces and some influence on the use of the Regia Aeronautica for the protection of convoys to North Africa. The Italian Navy resisted all German attempts to integrate its operations. Ships in different squadrons never trained together, and Supermarine Italian Navy High Command constantly overruled lower-level commanders. Convoy Plan. Convoy MW13 consisted of the British Denbighshire 8,393 gross register tonnage GRT, Dutch Bantam 9,312 GRT, the U.S. Robin Locksley 7,000 GRT, and Mormocmoon 7,939 GRT. The escort was provided by the 15th Cruiser Squadron, Rear Admiral Arthur Power, with the Arethusa Class 6 in 15 cm cruisers HMS Arethusa and Orion, with the Dido Class 5.25 and 13.3 cm cruisers HMS Cleopatra, Euryalus, and Dido. The cruisers were accompanied by the 14th Destroyer Flotilla with HMS Jervis, Javelin, Kelvin, Nubian, Pagham, Paladin, and Petard. The 10 Hunt-class destroyers of the 12th Destroyer Flotilla, comprising HMS Aldenham, Beaufort, Belvoir, Croom, Dulverton, Exmoor, Haworth, Hursley, Tetcott, and the Greek Pindos provided support. For security reasons, Bantam and Denbighshire loaded cargo at Port Sudan, and their bridges and gun positions were given extra sandbag protection. The ships met at Suez Bay and entered the Suez Canal on 15 November, touched at Port Said on 16 November to embark more ammunition, and entered the Mediterranean at 4:00 p.m. The ships were to follow the Cyrenaican shore, about 40 nmi 46 mi, 74 km out, within the range of Allied single-engined fighters for 2 days after leaving Port Said until north of Benghazi at dusk for a turn north and a run for Malta. Land Campaign. The 8th Army recaptured Mersa Matra on 8 November, the day that Torch began. A convoy set sail from Alexandria to Matra the same day. Convoy MW13 was not due to sail until the landing grounds at Tobruk had been recaptured, and it was hoped that Martuba Air Base near Derna would be operational by 17 November. On 11 November, DAF reconnaissance aircraft uncovered Axis evacuations of Bardia and Tobruk, which were captured on 12 and 13 November. The first Allied convoy reached Tobruk on 19 November. Axis fuel shortages and the stocks available at Benghazi made it likely that the retreat would continue along the coast road via Balbia north of the Jebel Akhtar and ultra intercepts of Axis Enigma machine ciphers by 11. There was considerable apprehension among the Axis of a British outflanking move south of the Jebel Akhtar, made worse by the loss of a fuel tanker en route to Benghazi. The landing grounds at Gazala were open to the DAF by 17 November, and Martuba was operational on 19 November, from which land-based aircraft escorted the convoy. Convoy MW13, 16-18 November. MW13 began passage through the Suez Canal and on 16 November reached Port Said in the afternoon. During the evening, the convoy left Port Said with the 15th Cruiser Squadron and the 14th Destroyer Flotilla. Off Alexandria on 17 November, The 10 Hunt-class destroyers of the 12th Destroyer Flotilla joined the convoy, and the cruisers and fleet destroyers refueled at Alexandria. Anti-submarine sorties were flown around the clock by Bristol Bisleys of 15 Squadron South African Air Force, Lockheed Hudson's of 439 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force RAF, and the Ferry Swordfish of 815 Squadron Fleet Air Arm. The twin-engined Beaufighters of 252 Squadron Royal Air Force patrolled nearby at dawn and twilight. Just before noon, a formation of Junkers Ju-88 bombers attacked the convoy, but was seen off by the Curtiss Kid Hawks of 450 Squadron RAF. No more attacks were made on the convoy for the rest of the day. As dark fell and the cruisers and fleet destroyers, except for Euryalus, separated from the convoy for the night, both groups of ships were attacked by torpedo bombers. No damage was done to the convoy, but the cruiser Arethusa was torpedoed forward of the bridge and took a list to port under a plume of smoke. The crew suffered 156 men killed and more wounded, many badly burned. Petard took the ship in tow from the stern, watched over by Jervis and Javelin, and began the voyage back to Alexandria. 1920 November. At dawn the cruisers and fleet destroyers rejoined the convoy, which received air cover from Malta Beaufighters and Spitfires, 6 Martin Baltimore reconnaissance bombers from 203 Squadron RAF from Cambat Gambut in Libya, flew ahead of the convoy as it made its way northwards. Coordination between the ships and aircraft was much improved by better training and the availability of VHF radio telephones, which gave longer range and better reception between sea and air. At 2:00 p.m., when 80 NMI 92 Mi 150 km from Malta, the 15th Cruiser Squadron and the fleet destroyers detached and turned for Alexandria. Euryalus and the 12th Destroyer Flotilla were escorted by the minesweeper HMS Speedy and other local boats into Grand Harbor at 1:30 a.m. on 20 November, to the cheers of the population and garrison. Unloading began at 3:00 a.m., and the siege of Malta had been considerably alleviated by 26 November. Axis aircraft had attempted to bomb the ships, but petrol vapor fire on Denbighshire was more dangerous. Aftermath. Analysis. Stephen Roskill, the official historian of the Royal Navy, wrote in 1962, submarines were transferred from magic carpet rides to offensive operations, and at the end of November, 821 Naval Air Squadron ferry albacores transferred to Malta, as did Force K with the cruisers Dido and Euryalus and 4 fleet destroyers. A motor torpedo boat flotilla arrived soon after. Another cruiser and destroyer force began to operate from Bone in Algeria, which from 1 December enabled the Navy to attack Axis convoys to Tunisia from both directions. In 2003, Richard Woodman wrote that Stoneage delivered 35,000 short tons, 31,751 t of supplies, which advanced the deadline at which Malta would be compelled to surrender for lack of supplies to mid-December. The Eighth Army had expelled the Axis forces from Egypt and Cyrenaica, having entered Benghazi on 20 November. In Tunisia, the First Army was about 40 mi 64 km from Bizerta, preparing for its next advance. Allied success on land made convoy operations much safer, and Operation Portcullis, the next Malta convoy, arrived safely on 5 December. Casualties. The torpedoing of Arethusa killed 156 men and more were seriously injured, many by burns. The RAF lost 5 aircraft, 3 of them Spitfires. Footnotes.